Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome to another episode at Strong Believers podcast. We have Sheikh Saalim Al-Azhari here today with us, inshallah, and we're going to be discussing his studies and him being a student of medicine and a student of knowledge in the Islamic sciences. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Barakallahu fiqh, alhamdulillah, good.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, all good. To start off, inshallah, I wanted to know a bit about your studies abroad. I know you studied medicine here in the UK, and then you decided to go abroad. How did you sort of come to that conclusion? What made you have the drive to go abroad and study and leave your medical degree?
Yeah, so good question. So when I was in studying medicine here, so that's where I first started, at St George's in South London. I always wanted to go and study in terms of Islamic sciences, but I couldn't really go during the degree. So the degree is 5 years. And I thought, if I go, am I going to come back? Am I really going to finish the degree? So I thought, okay, maybe when I finish the degree, then I'll go. But then when I finished the degree, the system is you're qualified, but you still have to do like 2 years essentially to get your full kind of registration, etc. So I did 2 years after that here. And then after that, then I thought, okay, look, I have to go now. I've done my 2 years here. And that's when I went. And then I was in Egypt. I was in Cairo for about 7 years.
MashaAllah. So you finished your medical degree first?
Finished my medical degree first, yeah. I worked 2 years at NHS and then went and then came back back to the NHS, yeah. So
how did you find that, leaving like the secular studies and going to the Islamic studies like full time? Because they're both really they take a lot of your time. How would you compare the two different types of studies?
Yeah, so they're both different. So in terms of the medical aspect, there was a lot of practical things. So for example, you have to see patients, examine patients, that kind of. There's a lot of more hands-on practical things. Whereas the Islamic side really is you're studying in terms of books, in terms of learning from shuyukh. So it's a bit more different. It's a bit more academic in that way. And it's a lot of spending time on your own, doing a lot of things on your own. For example, nobody can help you memorize hadith. You have to sit there and do it yourself, for example, or Quran or whatever it is. It's different in that way.
Do you think studying medicine is harder than Islamic sciences, or the other way around?
The thing with Islamic sciences is that it never ends, and the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Is really the honest truth. So even now we're still learning, and it's an ocean. It's never ending. So in that regard, in terms of the constant knowledge that you need to seek to keep up with things, in medicine it is as well, to a certain degree, but maybe not as much. So for example, you need to know all, new things that are happening in the world. Recently, things like Bitcoin, for example, Forex. I had a couple of questions about that recently. All these types of things that you need to kind of keep your eye on and keep researching. It's more of a constant thing.
To go on to that topic of the Forex and the whole exchange stuff, because we get a lot of questions, and a lot of, like, the Muslims are into that field right now. Have the scholars come to some sort of conclusion on that yet?
There's no definitive answer on Bitcoin. Some scholars say so. Now a large number of scholars say Bitcoins, but should avoid it. With regards to Forex, so Mufti Taqi Usmani, who's specialist in finance and in that aspect, he says you should avoid it, and a couple of other people have said you should avoid it as well. So at the moment, I think there are still certain aspects where are a bit dubious. There's still a bit of research going on.
I remember Sheikh Haytham, I think he had a gathering and he was speaking about it, and he was saying it's like creating a new currency which is not based on like gold and silver and stuff. So it should be avoided. But I heard some are allowing it and some are saying, but I think it's just best to avoid, isn't it?
If you're in doubt, as the Prophet said, if you're in doubt, then just leave it.
Subhanallah. So how would you say your studies, to go back into that topic of your Islamic studies, how do you think that's like now helped you when you're studying medicine, and when you have patients and when you're in the hospital and you're seeing all these different kind of things, what kind of impact has that had on you?
So the Islamic side really teaches you, one of the things anyway, it really teaches you how to be patient. I was going to say patient with your patients, but yeah, being patient in general, because you know, when you're like in the middle of the desert, in the middle of Cairo, you got, you know, hardly know anyone around, and you're sitting there and you're struggling, and you have to memorize X, Y, and Z and learn X, Y, and Z. And, you know, it's like 40 degrees outside, and all kinds of things are going on. It really does teach you to have that level of patience with regards to dealing with other people, and just in regards to yourself. So one of the things, even some of the other people that I work with, they always, not always, but a lot of people generally, they say, you know, you don't seem to get stressed, and you don't seem to, you know, get worried about things. I'm like, yeah, because I've been in the desert in Egypt for 7 years. You've been there for 7 years, you won't get stressed when you come back. So yeah, that's one of the aspects that I've learned, definitely.
SubhanAllah. Were the conditions quite tough when you were studying there?
It depends what you mean by tough. I mean, it was different. It's different. So you know, when you're used to having running water all the time, electricity all the time, and you go suddenly, and then, you know, you get cuts here and there, and you know, you're used to driving a car, for example, and then over there you're walking everywhere, or you're having to get taxis. So it's different in that aspect. Yeah, but it was good, alhamdulillah. Benefited.
Do you think like living in that kind of environment sort of allows you to implement more of like the nuances and the ease that Allah has created in terms of the deen? Because sometimes you might be in areas where there's no water and you're in the desert and stuff like that.
Yeah. So yeah, in a way you could say that. But I think over here, coming back here, sometimes you appreciate more what Allah has given us.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that really you can really take from having spent time away. You know, even a small thing like having running water, for example, all the time, or not having to, you know, or having hot water, for example, things like that. And yeah, I'm just thinking back about it now. There's even things like, you know, just walking the street and you don't have dogs chasing you down the street. More things like that. But you know,
yeah. Were you ever chased by a dog?
Many times. Many times. Yeah. Many times. Yeah. I was a pro. Like I'm pro now, knowing which I had to get out of it. Yeah. So alhamdulillah. Yeah. But it's a good experience.
Yes, I remember in one of your classes you mentioned how Islam has been made really easy. The fact that it was sent to people who couldn't read or write, and they were in the desert, and there's hardly any water, and all of these kind of facilities. So if they were able to practice Islam, that we can practice Islam.
You can practice Islam anyway. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, definitely.
People who aren't really practicing, and they might see Islam as daunting to sort of like get into and practice, and they feel like they have to do everything, otherwise there's no point doing any of it. How would you advise those kind of people?
So the main key thing that, you know, whatever you're doing, is that you need to just really hold on to your salah. No matter what you're doing in your life, that is the real key thing. That's the rope that really links us, you know, from this life, you know, to the akhirah. And that's the bond that you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is no matter what you do in your life, just make sure you pray your 5 times a day. Just make sure you do that. And that will really, even if it's not now, then later on you will, you know, see the effects. Allah mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Ankabut as well, that inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That when we pray the salah is the aspect that prevents us from committing sins, committing mistakes. Because, you know, every time 5 times a day you're turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we really prayed in the way in which Allah wants us to pray, wants us, you know, we should be praying, it will really have that effect on your heart and then the rest of, you know, your actions.
It's about establishing that connection with Allah, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think some people that do pray, or most of us, when we do pray, we don't have that connection.
Yeah.
So we go back to sin.
I mean, this is, one of the aspects that we often find is that we've often concentrated a lot on the external aspects of prayer. You know, where do you put your hands? You put your hands here, here, here. Do you do Raf al-Yayn? Do you not do Raf al-Yadayn? Foot to foot, ankle to ankle. Do you do all of these things? And we've kind of, you know, in the UK anyway, in the last maybe 10 years or so, really focused on these issues. and there's a time and place for them. But the main focus really of the salah is, you know, the position of your heart, the state of your heart when you're in that salah. And we know that in fact the reward of the salah is proportional to your khushu'. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said that in Hadith of Abu Dawood, that, you know, a person will pray and he'll get a tenth of his reward, and a person will pray and get ninth, and so on and so on and so on. Why? Because although they're praying the same salah, their concentration, their khushu' in the salah differs. So this is a key thing, which really, instead of focusing always on the external aspects, we need to focus on the internal aspects. And once we fix that, then everything else will come, inshallah.
Yes, how do you think that a person can develop that khushu' and have that connection in the salah?
Yeah, so it will come with time, and we're all searching for it, and you know, it's a never-ending thing essentially. As many of the Salaf, they used to say, for example, just talking about Qiyamul Layl, they used to say that it would take 20 years for us to pray Qiyamul Layl, and we wouldn't see the benefit until 20 years afterwards. We wouldn't start to enjoy it. So it's about constantly striving, and Allah always one of the things that Allah looks to see those who are striving, looks to see for those who really want that reward, want that good, or who want that in their life. And it's about, you know, trying to persevere. There's a few things that we normally mention in terms of how we can improve our khushu'. So for those that don't know Arabic, I always say that externally what you wear will have an impact on you internally. So even the clothes that you wear, you know, sometimes you see people, they come in like, you know, for Fajr, and they'll come in like, you know, the clothes, their pajamas essentially. But you know, if you go for a job interview or speaking to someone important, you never go in your pajamas. You know, and we're speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So externally, the clothes should be appropriate, and that will have an impact on you internally. And then you want to start, for example, Surah Fatiha, which we all recite for every single rak'ah that we pray. So knowing the meaning of Surah Fatiha, just knowing the tafsir, you know, if anyone doesn't know it, just go online, just, you know, Ibn Kathir has a, you know, very good explanation in English of it. And then the surahs that you recite. So for example, you know, most people recite Surah Ikhlas or Surah Al-Asr or one of these, whatever surah you recite. Just knowing the translation and the tafsir of that will help you in your khushu', in your salah, in your relationship with your prayer as well. Really understanding why you're saying things, what it means, and why you're doing certain things. And inshallah, that builds over time.
MashaAllah. How do you think with fiqh, do you think that aids in spirituality? Because I know you've studied fiqh abroad quite extensively. Do you think that helped you in terms of your spirituality and getting close to Allah, or is it, 'cause it's one of the dry sciences, isn't it?
No, so did the opposite in a way actually. Because you're kind of, so when you're studying, it's you're just there with your books, and you're there, you know, with your teachers, your shuyukh who you go and sit with, and really you don't really have the aspect, come back to medicine, where you have that interaction with others. So when you're studying anyway, and it can become a bit monotonous, and it can become a bit like it can affect the heart. And even for me personally, I felt as though I was not having that. It was not really. I was learning everything. It was going in, but I wasn't having that spiritual aspect. Okay, it wasn't really affecting my heart. And I did speak to quite a few people, and people that I spoke to, they all said the same thing. I said, yeah, that we experienced the same thing. And one of the reasons is when you don't have that, or we don't study, for example, purification of the heart, or tazkiyatun nafs, alongside or at the same point, or doing something along those lines, really it can affect your heart, and your heart can become affected. Just seeing things black and white, just seeing, you know, learning things in and out, just doing the same daily routine, for example. And that's one of the things that I really learned, that you know, this aspect of really trying to focus on building that relationship with Allah. Because fiqh is just, you know, for example, you're talking about how do you pray, how do you do wudu, what breaks your fast, what doesn't break your fast. That's really, you know, it doesn't affect the heart, to be honest with you. So really we always need to have, all of us need to have something that really builds that love of Allah in our hearts, whatever that may be. For example, learning about Allah's names, for example, you know, doing some type of tafsir or tadabbur or something along those lines. And that's really a key aspect.
A few questions to follow up on that is the first one would be, did you end up doing something to like remedy that alongside it? And the second one would be, is the way the fiqh is taught now, is it different to how the Salaf used to learn it? And the third thing would be, I forgot my third question now.
That's all right, don't worry, I'll probably forget the second one, but we'll do the first one.
If you could mention it.
What was the first one again? Actually, I've forgotten already. The first one was about...
it was about
fiqh, yes. Or what did I do? Yeah.
like if you.
So then I what I did was I tried to then focus a bit more on just even just reading certain things. So for example, learning about the names of Allah, how you can practically then use that, for example, in dua. So because when you're in university, for Azhar, Medina, wherever it is, they're not going to teach you, let's say, the names of Allah, how you apply that in dua. They're going to teach you, okay, the rulings of salah, the rulings of zakat, for example. They're going to teach you aqidah, they're going to teach you hadith. They're not going to focus on this aspect. So I found that this aspect was something that I really needed to work on, and when I started to do it, then I found a lot of benefit. So personally, that's what I did, and also building a relationship with the Quran, because when you're studying, for example, if you're just learning or memorizing or revising the Quran, because time is short as well when you study. Imagine when you got let's say a relatively short amount of time to try and learn as much as you can. And so you're always busy doing things. So just having that time, to taking out 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day, just have something that you read, whether it's, tazkiyah to nafs, purification of the soul, something along those lines, really did benefit me.
MashaAllah. So people like going into it now, studying it, should they study other things alongside it as well?
Yeah. So I would say you're going to have to do your normal studies, your Quran, your tafsir, your hadith, do all of that as well. But also, every night just before you go to sleep, maybe just have a book that you're going through, whether it be, for example, like we said, learning about Allah's names, whether it be something about I don't know, a dhikr, whatever it may be. There's many books you could use, but something along those type of lines, and that will really benefit you practically, because otherwise it's a lot of knowledge going in, but we need to affect ourselves practically whilst we're studying, going through that time as well.
Because one of the things I feel like is maybe that the secular academia has impacted the Muslim world in terms of like teaching and stuff, whereas maybe in the past they used to work more on the soul and purifying the nafs and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So and of course in the past they didn't have this, the Salaf, for example, they didn't have the way we study fiqh and the way we study, the way it's taught, should I say, aqidah and hadith. They were learning it as a part of the day, basically, as part of the daily routine. This is what happened. They would just, carry on like that. Whereas now it's a bit more classified and a bit more boxed in and a bit more of kind of can be a bit mundane. If you always, you classify things in certain boxes, doing things in a certain way. Whereas really we need the practical aspects. And that's one of the things, a bit like medicine actually. So when you study your medical degree and you come out and you think, yeah, you've done it and you know everything, and you walk into the first day. I remember actually my first day. So I turned up the hospital, and so you do your normal jobs, and then I remember one of the nurses, then she called out, she said, oh, we need a doctor, yeah. So now I'm looking around, I'm like, yeah, where's the doctor? And I'm the doctor today. Because the day before, I was a student. And that living that practical, that practically when you start to implement what you've been learning, it's like another life. It's like I learned more working as a doctor than I learned in that 5-year study. Maybe in that 1 year or 2 years that I was here before I went to Egypt. You learn so much more. And the same, having studied Islamic sciences, I was there for 7 years. But even the time I've been back here, when you're having to relate to how issues people are going through, having to be able to relate what you've learned back to practically how it impacts on people, and how you can relate it to living in the West, living in the UK, living in London, that aspect really is much harder. Yeah. And you learn so much more by that, and you become so much less rigid in the way that you maybe used to think. That's one of the things that I found anyway. Ahmed, Assalamu alaikum. I've been itching. There's the juggernaut, bro. The juggernaut is in the house. How you doing? Good to see you, Chef. How's everything?
No, like, good to see you. I'm super glad to be here. I feel like I'm sitting in an audience. There's so many times I have to control my reactions.
That's how it is. Okay.
So, Sheikh, yes. People who are sort of like who are in your shoes, who are studying maybe medicine now or studying something else, or maybe they're working and they want to go abroad and study, but they have that fear of, if I come back, I might not have that same job, I might not be able to do what I could do or earn as much as before, or taking that leap. What would you advise people like that?
So That's a good question. So it depends on the individual. And what I'd say is that you need to ask yourself, what are you going to do with it at the end? So lots of brothers, when I ask them, for example, okay, you want to go abroad, you want to study for X amount of years. Okay, what's your plan? What are you going to come back and do afterwards? How are you going to, for example, finance going abroad? You know, are you married, for example? Do you have children? What are you going to do over there with your wife, with your kids? You know, what's your plan, basically? So all of these things need to be taken into account. And a lot of brothers, you know, as I said, it sounds nice on the face of it, like, okay, you know, this person studied X, Y, and Z. But on all honest truth, it's not easy. When you're sitting there in a room and, you know, and the sun's baking down and you're just there and you're sitting trying to memorize hadith for hours, for example, is hard. It's hard, to be honest with you. And we saw many brothers that came you know, they started and then it becomes difficult, and a lot of brothers had left in the end. But the key thing is knowing what you want to do. So if you're somebody, for example, that wants to be able to give Jummah khutbahs, wants to learn Arabic, have a close relationship with the Quran, then yeah, great. You don't need to spend 10 years over there, for example. You can do that in a year, maybe 2 years. If it's somebody who wants to be like, you know, a scholar, then you need to have all of these plans. Okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive? Family, how am I going to afford it? What am I going to do when I come back for work? Because that's the other thing as well. When you come back, you know, you need to be able to have a plan as to how you're going to support yourself. And a lot of these things are realistic. You know, these are the things that everyday people are going to have to go through, because it's easy to just say, yeah, I'm going to go abroad. But then, you know, think about it in a bit more detail. And if you have that plan, then yeah, inshallah, Allah will facilitate it. It was all about having that intention as well. So when you have that intention, you really want to do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah will facilitate and open the door for you. But we need to be practical as well, in terms of how we're going to go about these things.
For you, do you find it was easier because you study medicine and that's some like sort of you're secure in terms of coming back and you have the job and
so kind of. So I didn't know at the time. So I took 7 years out of medicine, but I promised my dad that if I go abroad, then I'll come back and I won't need medicine. So when I came back, then I had to do 4 months or so just to make sure that all my competencies were still fine, that was okay. And so I had to make up 4 months basically for that. Was it 6 months? It was a few months anyway. And that kind of got me back into the swing of things again. So it does depend on your job. So for example, some brothers who maybe, you know, if you're working at home, maybe you can still work when you're abroad. So it does vary on the job in itself.
Did you find it difficult to get back into like medicine?
Into medicine? It wasn't easy, but alhamdulillah, Allah facilitated it. So you know, alhamdulillah, it was okay.
Alhamdulillah. Oh, that's good. What were some of the struggles that you saw among brothers who came and then they weren't able to like stay on studying
in Egypt? A lot of it is, as far as one of the things we noticed, that whenever brothers came, and myself, I don't know why it was, but within the first week or two of coming, there'd always be something happening to somebody. So I remember brothers who would come, and even myself, I'll give my own example. So the first week that I went there, I remember, so I went there, Egypt, and I didn't know, I hardly knew any Arabic, let alone any Amiya, which is the language that the Egyptians speak. So I went there and I had a flat there that I was renting, so it was a brother's flat. And I think it was on the second or third day, the bawab, or the person, who's like the caretaker, every building has a caretaker at the bottom of the building. So he comes up to me and he's saying something, and I haven't got a clue what he's saying. He could be speaking gibberish, I don't know what he was saying. And so my Arabic teacher's saying, do you know what he's saying? And I'm like, no, I don't know what he's saying. He's saying, look, the building's about to be closed down because of the structural issues, something like it might fall down or something, and you have to leave in 3 days' time. And I'm like, I just got here 2 days ago. And so then I didn't know I knew one person at the time in the country. Then I had to go look for a flat, and that's like in and of itself, because it's not like here. There's no, estate agents the same way here. You literally have to go around knocking on doors in buildings, saying, "Do you have a spare flat? Do you know one that has a spare flat?" And then you have to go around that. So, so many things happened there, and then for them we had a flood. This is all like initially when you go there. It's like as if Allah puts it as a test. Yeah. And we had I remember the flat flooded, and then we had issue with in the next place we moved to, an issue with cockroaches. Then after that, the next place we moved to, we had an issue with rats. So we had a couple of rats basically. So we didn't know this. So that were basically, they were taking food. So like biscuits and things like that. You know, have cupboards, so they would come in and they were taking the biscuits, and they were climbing up and then hoarding the biscuits on the top. So lots of things go wrong like that. Yeah, I know. And lots of things happen to different brothers.
Yeah.
Similar type of things, that there was difficulties. You know, they would have difficulties maybe with their family. But once you get over that, and it wasn't just me, it was lots of brothers had these different issues. But once you get over that initial period, then alhamdulillah, you know, Allah facilitate it for us. But it's like as though that's a little bit of a test. Do you really want to do it? Are you really sincere in it? That kind of thing. And yeah, it's all about persevering.
Were there any times where you just thought like, I can't do this. I have to.
When I saw those rats, I was like, where's my passport? I need to go back to UK. Yeah. But alhamdulillah, it was okay. It was okay. Yeah.
What's the climate there like now? Because a little while ago they weren't allowed to sort of teach and do certain things. How was it like as a student of knowledge there?
So when I was there, so I went through different. So when I was there, so I left a few years ago now, 3 years ago. But when I was there, I remember I went through the time period when Mubarak was there. He was still in charge, and then I was there when Mursi was there, and I was there when Sisi was there. This during the time period I was there. So things kind of changed when I was there, and also I think things have changed now. So when I was there, when I first went, Mubarak was there, it was kind of the status quo that had been there for the last, you know, few decades or whatnot. So everybody kind of knew their role, and studying wasn't a problem, alhamdulillah. We never really had any issues, especially being from Britain. There were no, and I was studying at Azhar at the university as well, so it wasn't, you know, you weren't studying in a place that was unknown. So alhamdulillah, I never had any issues.
MashaAllah.
Yeah.
What was some of the impacts that your teachers had on you while you were over there?
Yeah, so your teachers impact on you a lot, and you learn so many, you know, things that you really can't learn from books, and that's one of the key things as well. You know, just generally how to be as a person, and when you see their relationship with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. For example, you know, you're sitting there and you know they're eating and they're doing dhikr things, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, you know, just eating as if, you know, they'd never, you know, maybe even never seen food before. That's literally how they're remembering Allah when they're eating. So things like that you can't really pick out and learn from a book. They're invaluable. In fact, I remember actually an incident. You mentioned Sheikh Haytham and the beginning. So I remember an incident with him. So he came to visit us in Egypt, and I remember at the time, it was very early into when I went, maybe a year or so, and I was telling him, you know, that thinking about going to Azhar and study, but I've also, well, obviously I knew him from before. You know, I've got medicine and this and that now, so, you know, Sheikh, I don't know what to do, basically. And he said, I remember this, so this was at Fajr time, and we're walking to, I think it was Fajr time? Yeah, it's Fajr time. So we're walking to the masjid. And he said, look, Salim, he said, it's just me, you, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And he said, look, this life is worth nothing. He said, you know, that whatever you do here in terms of, you know, wealth, in terms of your job, really in the grand scheme of things, is the dunya really is small. It's worth nothing. Really, if you have the opportunity and the ability to do something better for your dunya and for your akhirah, then, you know, we should try and do it. And I remember those words, you know, when you're in the middle of nowhere in the dark and you're walking with somebody and they say that, it really, you know, had an impact on me. Yeah, things like that you learn from other people, when you meet other scholars, really have a big impact on a person.
Do you still try to keep in contact with your mashayikh back in Egypt?
Yeah, so I still do. Not as often, just because we're so busy over here. But you always need, whoever you are, you always need to be in contact with certain people, peers and others who are senior to you, to you know, to help make sure that, you know, you as an individual, you're understanding things in the correct way, and you're able to discuss and go back and forth and debate and ensure that, you know, that's good for one's own learning as well, looking at things from another point of view. And it helps you kind of focus on what you're doing as well.
MashaAllah. The one thing I want, because we were speaking about Sheikh Haytham, and people ask him a lot about fatwa on mortgages and stuff like that.
Yeah. Should ask him. Invite him for a podcast next time.
Inshallah. I'll get him on, inshallah.
Yeah, no problem.
But what are some of the ways you think we can try and make like a halal alternative, like for mortgages?
Yeah. So there are a few a couple of companies that are going into that. So as we know, there are you have, for example, various organisations. If there's no Bank of Britain, for example, and other banks and companies that are producing what are termed as Sharia-compliant mortgages, for example. And there's a difference of opinion about, are they really Sharia-compliant, are they not Sharia-compliant? And there are a couple of new ones that are coming up. One is called, am I allowed to mention this, or is that promotion? Okay, all right. I'm not getting paid for this. Okay, so one, you're not getting paid either. Okay, all right, yeah. So one is called, I think, Halo Housing. So there's certain aspects of that one that I know a number of scholars said that's fine. And there's a second one called, I think it's called Primary Finance, which has just started up, which again a number of scholars have looked at and said, yeah, there's no issues with those ones.
Inshallah. What about Al-Rayyan? Is it completely different to that kind of bank?
So Al-Rayyan is one which the scholars do have a few differences over certain aspects of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay, inshallah. I'll have to look into that. Yeah. One of the other things that people ask a lot about is that people are pressured with it, actually, is that with Asian families especially, they're like, you're allowed to have your first house. They call it the first house fatwa sort of thing. Like if it's your first house, you're allowed to get a mortgage.
Okay.
Is there any basis to that?
Is that an Afghan thing?
Afghans, and I've heard other people say it as well.
Okay. I haven't heard that, to be honest with you. First house fatwa.
Yeah.
I name it.
I name it first house fatwa, but
no, I haven't heard of that, to be honest. But regardless, the thing in all of this, the bottom line in all of this is that Allah mentions about riba in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, as we know, and it's a really severe warning when Allah said that you're going to wage war against him.
Yeah.
And as we just touched upon, what scholars say that this life really is temporary. It's not it's not a permanent thing. Even the other day, I remember when I was doing so I did the khutbah in a mosque last week, and I mentioned that the average lifespan here in the UK, according to the National Office for Statistics, is 81 years.
Wow.
Imagine the average lifespan is 81 years. Now imagine from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or 1400 years ago, okay, people have been living in their graves for 1400 years, okay, until now, and then Allah knows how long it will be to the Day of Judgment. Imagine how many hundreds of years, and yet we're only alive for maybe 81 years. So a really small proportion of that time. So if you really always have the akhirah in mind, then it will really put your heart at ease in terms of what you do in this life. So always, whatever we're doing in this life, yes, Allah says, there's no problem in terms of if you want to have a nice house, a nice car, a nice camera, a nice podcast, no problem with that. Nice clothes, whatever it is. But Allah says, don't forget him. And don't forget the akhirah. So as long as you have that in your mind, then inshallah Allah will facilitate it for you.
Inshallah. What are some of the crazy fatwa you get asked about on Instagram maybe, or just in general?
Before the watershed. There was one really funny one, but yeah, I don't think we can say it online. Crazy fatwa. What's the craziest one I've been asked? That's a good question. I'm gonna have to think about that one. Let me think about them. I'll come back to that one.
Okay, inshallah.
Yeah.
Now, while you're here, how do you find the balance of medicine? Because you're still learning for that as well, and Islamic sciences, and you're doing maybe classes or giving khutbah. How are you managing your time? What's your
so it's difficult. So when I came back from Egypt, so then I went into training as a GP. So I'm pretty much finished that now, training as a GP. So it's more there's not so much learning, or I don't have any exams to do, for example. It's more just working. But medicine is one of those things that it's not always a 9-to-5 job. If somebody comes in and they're unwell, it's not like you can't, nobody's going to leave them. You want to help people, and you want to have that responsibility to be able to help people as well. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that that the best of people are the ones who are the most beneficial to others in whatever shape or form that may be. So it does take up a lot of time, alhamdulillah, but there's a lot of other benefits to it that maybe there isn't in certain other jobs or fields. So that's one aspect. But it does become a bit more tricky in terms of doing things in terms of the Shari'i side. So this is why I always say, if anyone wants to do Shari'i studies, and you ask any scholar or most scholars in the in the Western UK, don't do medicine. Medicine is not the not the way to go, because it takes up so much time. Imagine doing a GP. I don't have to do nights anymore or weekends, but when you're doing certain rotas, you have to do nights, you have to do weekends. Literally every other weekend you're working. You finish at 8 o'clock in the evening. Sometimes you finish at midnight. Sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning, and you don't have that stability. Whereas if you're doing a class, you're going to be missing weeks, for example, if you're teaching the class or if you're attending a class, and it can become difficult in that aspect. So. Yeah, it is difficult, but as long as you have a plan, then inshallah, that's the key thing. So I always tell brothers, have a plan. Well, what I do personally, what I advise others is have a plan from Ramadan to Ramadan. So Ramadan's just gone now. Okay, just look at yourself this Ramadan in terms of your relationship with Allah, in terms of Quran, in terms of where you want to be, where you have been last Ramadan, and where you want to be next Ramadan. So by next Ramadan, you want to, I don't know, maybe have let's say gone through tafsir or surah Fatiha or something simple, whatever it is, and then you can work backwards. How do I achieve that? Okay, every Friday I'm going to spend 15 minutes looking at the tafsir, or I'm going to spend 15 minutes learning Surah Al-Kahf, part of Surah Al-Kahf, whatever it is. But try and have a plan from Ramadan to Ramadan, and then work backwards from next year, and that will really help focus you.
MashaAllah. What can we expect from you in like the upcoming future, inshallah?
It's a good question. My family asked me the same question as well.
No pressure there.
So at the moment, I do the Islam channel Q&A on Fridays. So I do a class on Thursdays. We're going through Tadabbur of Surah Al-Kahf. And we're also going through Journey of the Soul as well. So that even just preparing for that, for example, the Tadabbur, we spent an hour and 15 minutes just on 4 words the last week. Just because, when you're doing tadabbur and you're really thinking, why did Allah say this? What's Allah telling me? Why did He say it in this way? What can I take it from it? So really, that's what I'm doing at the moment in terms of the class that I'm teaching. And then, do the Instagram questions or Fatwagram, as we call it. And at the moment, that's really kind of taking up most of my time. Yeah, so we'll see in the future. I just finished, so just for Ramadan, just gone, I did a series for Islam channel on called Conversation in the Quran. So that took up a bit of time prior to Ramadan. So it was going through a conversation Allah's preserved for us in the Quran. So for example, the conversation between Allah and Musa alayhi salam, or between Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, and we're looking at one conversation in each juz. So that was what I did before Ramadan, and then Ramadan's just finished a few weeks ago. So yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Were there any of the stories or any of the conversations that really stuck out for you, like while you were?
Yeah, the one, my kind of favorite one at the moment was the story in Surah Al-A'raf, which is one of my favorite surahs, when the conversation between the people of Jannah and people of Jahannam. That's a really amazing conversation, and the people of Al-A'raf and how they're there, and these people whose good deeds are equal to their bad deeds, and they don't know where they're going, if they're going to Jannah or if they're going to Jahannam. And then the people of Jannah, they say salam to they say salam to the people of Jannah, and how do they even know who's on the people of Jannah and who's the people of Jahannam? Then at the end of the conversation, the people of Jahannam, they're asking for even the smallest amount. Min al-ma. Min al-ma is not even just like the water bottle we're drinking now. Like when you finish that water bottle and there's like a few drops left at the bottom, they're asking for even for that amount of water. The way Allah describes it and the detail He describes it is amazing, and that's probably my favorite conversation.
What other ayah, if you remember, so we could look into it later on, inshallah.
The ayah number, so it's roughly, I think, about the 9th or 10th page. It's towards the beginning of Surah Al-Araf.
MashaAllah.
Yeah.
What are one of the prophets that like really stick out for you, and do you feel like you connect with any of them?
It's a good question. I've been asked that before. Do I have a favourite prophet? I don't think I do, actually. I don't think I do. I've never thought, do I have... I mean, was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just maybe because we know more about him, and when you learn more hadith about him and how he was as a person, I think I would have to say the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just purely because I know more about him than the others.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
I think for me, like the story of Nuh, like really like sticks out for me.
Yeah. Why is that?
He just, because he gave da'wah for so long.
Yeah.
And you can really, like in Surah An-Nuh, you can really tell the struggles he's going through, and he's
Yes.
mentioned like I give da'wah in the daytime and the nighttime and private and secret, and he's going through all of these things, and then his son as well, he doesn't accept Islam, and he says, I'll go on top of the mountain and I'll be protected there, and Nuh alayhi salam saying no one will be protected, and he's given out his hand like come on board the ship, and then he's still rejecting it, subhanallah. And it's there's a lot of lessons we can learn from it.
Definitely. So I remember, I think last week somebody asked me on Instagram, they said, what was your favorite incident, I think from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, something along those lines. And I don't speak incident, but I mean, one of the lessons that I think we can really use nowadays is the incident of Taif, where we know the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he went to give them da'wah, and then they pelted him with stones, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we know the famous narration about how Jibreel came with the angels of the two mountains between that town, and the angel said that we can crush these people, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said no. Even though there were people that, not just verbally but physically abused him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the extent where blood is coming out from parts of his feet, and even then the softness of his heart to say no. Really nowadays, so many questions I get nearly on a weekly basis about issues between families, brothers and between brothers, husbands and wives, in-laws, and really, if we really had that softness of the heart, or really, or the forgiving heart, really having that forgiving heart, really being able to look over people's mistakes and forgiving one another, and of course it's a two-way process, really that would take us a long way.
Yes, one of my teachers always says, in terms of forgiving as well, he says people like, I can't forgive this person, he done this wrong and that wrong, and he's like, but like that's what forgiveness is for. Like it's not there like that you forgive people when they don't do anything. You forgive when they've done something.
Yes, that's
so
right.
I think it takes a lot of working on the heart to like persevere through that and to forgive.
That's very true. I mean, the bottom line is that, as Allah said, if we want Allah to forgive us, then we need to forgive others. That's really the bottom line.
Like the story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, where I think that's what you're referring to, right? It must have, we know why Abu Bakr is in the state that the status he has because of that, subhanallah.
They even mentioned that some of the Salaf used to say that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he wasn't better than us in terms of praying more or fasting more or giving more charity than us, but he was of a high level because of something different, because of the state of his heart. Because when he did it, it was of a different level in terms of coming with how he was as a person, and that the sincerity that he did it with was of another level.
SubhanAllah. When it comes to like families and family problems and stuff like that, if a person's living with their family and they get constant like battles in terms of Islam, because we get a lot of messages on Instagram with brothers or sisters where they want to practice the deen, but their families are really like stopping them from it. How should they deal with that?
So it can be difficult. It depends on what their family are trying to stop. So to give me an example of something that they would say, like going to the
basically
mosque,
more stuff like if they were to go to classes, they will say you're becoming extreme. Why going to classes? Or like if you're the sisters they want to wear hijab, they'll say that's too much. Like don't wear it. Or like abaya, jilbab. Anything too Islamic visually, then
that's a good question. So I think sometimes it can work both ways, in that we need to be approaching them in the correct way as well. So for example, you're going to a class, explain who's doing the class, for example. I'm not talking about one of my classes, but you talk about who's doing the class. So once they understand, somebody's of a certain level, or somebody who the person is, that can often put their hearts at rest as well. Because otherwise it could be anybody, you could be going to see anybody, and yes, it's a valid, as a parent, for example, they're worried about their children, and that's normal. So I think from our side we need to be understanding of that as well, because often when we're young and we're zealous and we're passionate about studying, sometimes we don't see things from the other side, and we need to try and have that view as well, because they have that right upon us, our parents. So that's one aspect, and then looking at maybe if there are others, for example, who your parents may trust, other people of your friends or your community or people may trust, maybe going with them So at least they know, okay, you're not going alone. You're not just going to somebody. First of all, you're not going to somebody they don't know or they don't know about. Secondly, you're not going alone. You're going with others who they trust and who they acknowledge. That can often help. Thirdly, if that fails, the other thing you could do is maybe you could ask somebody who does attend the class. Maybe they can record it, for example. You can listen to it at home, or nowadays you've got so many things on YouTube, on Instagram, as you mentioned, Facebook. There's so many different avenues or ways of seeking knowledge that really, if it's going to put a barrier on your relationship between you and your parents, maybe it's best that you don't do it. And you seek knowledge in another way, which is, in the comfort of your own bedroom, and just on, whatever, on online.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I think you're right, in the, especially when it comes to seeing it from our parents' point of view. Obviously, growing up, I've had the same sort of struggles, and where your parents want something and you want something different, and to find that balance of listening to them and not listening to them, it's quite a struggle.
Yeah, it's difficult, especially and looking back as well. We always, when you're young, and the key thing is when you're young, when we don't realize this, is we don't have experience. Okay, and experience is something that there's no substitute for. I say this even in football. There's no substitute for experience, even on the football pitch. Okay, and in life it's the same. And it's the same when we're talking about medicine, and we mentioned that medicine, what you learn, on the job when you start working as a doctor is much more than what you learn maybe in medical school. And the same was in the Islamic side when I'm dealing with questions, for example. You learn so much more with that experience than you did, studying and sitting there reading a book, for example. And it's difficult when we're young, to kind of understand that. But that's why it's important to have a relationship with somebody who's older, to have a relationship with a teacher, with a scholar, with an ustad, whoever it may be, who's able to guide you and tell you, okay, look, the relationship with your parents is probably the most relationship or the most important relationship that you will have. I remember somebody, one sheikh, once said that, if you're married, you can get divorced. Talking to brothers here, you can get divorced, you can marry again. No problem with that. But if you lose your parents, okay, you can't go and buy another parent, or you can't go and get another parent. Your mum's your mum, your dad's your dad. At the end of the day, there's no replacement for them. So that relationship is a really sacred, important relationship that we really need to uphold.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I think with that, a lot of brothers and sisters, they struggle as well when it comes to marriage, and it's from a different culture and a different background.
I know where this is going.
Where do you draw the line with that? Like, should you listen to them completely and just go with whoever they say, or if so long as they're Islamic, they have good character, you should go for it? And I know it's a
it's a bigger, it's not every other day, but at least a couple of times a week, I get this question. So and for example, his sister says that the recent one I had, sister said the other day, I think the sister is from, her parents' background is from India, I think, originally, and the brother's from Malaysia originally, his background, and there was an issue that the clash of cultures. My parents won't accept his culture. He's from a different country. That kind of similar type of thing, or different background, or it's sometimes even different color skin. We get these questions as well. And really, the right of the parent is something which is very, very high. And there are ways in which you can go about it in terms of steps you can take. So what I normally advise, first of all, I say, okay, your parents, who are a lot older than you, 20, 30 maybe, or 10, 15, 20 years older than you, they may not listen to what you're going to say. But what you should try and do is try and have somebody who they may listen to. So for example, they may listen to, there's certain imam or certain scholar or certain ustad who they respect and they may listen to. So, or it may be a family friend or relative. So speak to that scholar or that family friend and say, look, this is a situation, I'm looking to get married. There's somebody who's appropriate. My parents are saying because of X, Y, and Z that it's not appropriate. Would you be able to come and maybe speak to both of us and go around it that way? Because it's easier, even, as an individual, imagine you have like a 15-year-old comes and he's trying to give you nasiha and he's talking to you about life experience. Realistically, somebody who's 13 years younger than you, are you going to take that in the same way if it's somebody who's, for example, your own age? You take it, even as the human nature, you take it differently. So, and we look at our parents, they're the same, they've been, maybe 40, 50, 60, 70, however old they may be. And, you're 20 years younger than them and you're trying to tell them, no, this is what I want to do in my life. This is what's best for me. When they've got that 20, 30 years experience over you, and you have to see it from that point of view as well. So if you have somebody who is of the same age level or somebody they respect, who is able to come and then speak to them, that's often one way in which can help. I'm not saying it's a solution, but it can aid the process. And I always advise that's the first step that one should try and take.
Sure, it reminds me of when we were kids and you want to play outside and you can't play outside. Right? And you ask one of your friends to come and ask your parents. It's all like that, but obviously at a higher level.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the next sort of stage after that, like say, is married brothers and sisters. What are some of the questions that you get and some of the advice you give, like for brothers and sisters?
For brothers that are married. So the questions don't normally come from the brothers, normally come from the sisters. Funny enough. So the common questions we get are, we get ones about the brother's not, or the husband is not spending enough time with the wife. He's always on his phone. He's always on Facebook, always on Instagram, always on Twitter. That's a common one. I think the other common question we get is like in-laws as well. Difficulties with in-laws. My in-laws are doing this. What should I do, for example? I remember you talked about one of the craziest questions I had. I remember one Instagram Fatwagram question that I had was a sister. She said that I was married to her brother and the brother during their marriage, he basically was engaging with prostitutes. Because of that, then he picked up a sexually transmitted infection. Then he passed it over to his wife. His wife was pregnant, and then that got then passed down to their baby. And then so their baby became unwell and was sick. And then the brother then started something along these lines. The brother, because it was a few months ago now, but the brother then started working as a spy, and he was spying on certain communities. And now she was asking me because the brother wanted to have contact with his child now. And she's saying, what should I do in this situation? This is what's happened. So that's probably even I was shocked by that. I was like, what do you say in that situation? It's very difficult. And then she was saying her relationship with the in-laws as well. So it's a combination of those type of things. What's
what would you advise of people who they initially get married? What are the things that they should focus on to build like a good solid foundation?
That's a good question. So I remember one brother, he said to me, he said that the best, no, he didn't say it to me, so we were talking about it, and he said the best piece of advice that I've ever been given is 2 words, and he said this will save your marriage. And I said, mashallah, what are these 2 words? Did I miss this hadith? And then he said the best words that any man can learn in marriage is yes darling. He said if you memorize these 2 words, yes darling, he said, it will take you a long way. So one of the key things is that in any relationship, whether it be husband wife or whatever type of relationship, you're going to have ups and downs. There will always be issues, and it's human nature. It will never be perfect. And often sometimes, people that, when you're younger and you think, okay, marriage is going to be plain sailing, this is all kind of like in that honeymoon period. Actually, another funny story. I'm telling all these stories now. So I remember one brother, he said marriage is like, he said it's like you have, one of these like gallon, like the Zamzam, when you have the Zamzam, it comes out of like this kind of like big tub inside. You know what I'm talking about? And then you open the tap at the bottom. Like you open the tap at the bottom, then it comes out. In the masjid.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. They said marriage is like that, where initially what happens is you have in one of these. He described it to me in one of these like containers, these big containers. You have honey at the bottom, and you have oil at the top. So he said initially you open the tap and then the honey comes out, and then after a while you get the oil that comes out. And then the brother goes, "SubhanAllah, I don't know what happened to me because my barrel must have been upside down because I opened it and oil started coming out at the beginning." SubhanAllah, why are you telling me this here? So funny stories like that. But the key thing really is we're all going to make mistakes. Okay, in all seriousness, we're all going to have ups and downs. It's about being able to forgive and being able to forget as well, because it's easy to have things built up in your heart, okay, but at the end of the day, you know, everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes, and we have to have that ability to do afu, which is really to try and forgive and to try and erase it and to try and move on and try and look at the bigger picture, essentially. Because what happens is sometimes we get a lot of questions. I remember recently a brother, he mentioned that you know, he had an argument with his wife. I can't remember what the argument was about. I think they were late for something, or the brother was late, and then so his wife was like, you know, you're making us late, this, and then a few months down the line they had another argument. I think the brother had done something, he'd promised to do something and hadn't done it, and then the sister mentioned that you know, you haven't done this, and also 3 months ago when we went to that wedding party you made me late as well for that. So although that being late for the wedding party didn't have any relation to the initial incident now, but it's still there in the back of one's mind. And it's in human nature as well, but we need to try and fight against that nafs, try and fight against holding those things against other people, trying to, you know, remember that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and we all want good for one another.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that we all make mistakes, so the more you hold someone else accountable for their mistakes, then you should expect the same from the other person.
Exactly, and try and have that forgiving heart. This is the key. You know, we mentioned the incident of Taif. Really try having that forgiving heart. Try and forgive, you know, others, and remember in the back of your mind that, you know, if I want Allah to forgive me, then I really need to forgive others.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I remember one Shaykh was mentioning that Allah has placed mawadda wa rahma. So the love that He's placed in you, that's like the honeymoon period. That's at the beginning. And then the rahmah, that's supposed to continue for the rest of the marriage. So you start with that, you know, honeymoon period where you kind of let everything go. Because you're so in love.
The honey at the bottom of the barrel.
Exactly. But then afterwards, you have to remember to have rahmah. No matter what happens, you have to have the rahmah.
It's that's the sort of room that often quoted in, you know, in the wedding invitations. You get this, as everyone mentions. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. But it's true. You need to have that rahmah for one another. You know, even I always mention the example of the hadith of Prophet in Sahih Bukhari, where, you know, you had a woman who used to sell her body essentially, and she gave, you know, the famous that she gave a dog, you know, some water, and because of that Prophet said that, you know, she deserves to be forgiven for her sins. And he had another female, and also in Sahih Bukhari, who caged up a cat. And the Prophet said because of that, just being bad to her cat, the Prophet said she's deserving a punishment for this. So imagine this is the relationship with animals. Okay, and this is the level, talking about Jannah and Jahannam, being punished and being, you know, forgiven for sins, for a relationship with a cat and a dog. So imagine a relationship between human beings and how sacred that is, and how important it is to have good relationships with others.
SubhanAllah. And like how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Musa alayhi salam to speak to Fir'aun. And kindly. So how about our wives and our parents and families who are nowhere near that? To wrap up, is there any final messages you have? Anything else?
I don't know actually. Any final messages?
Any advice for the youth out there, for us, something that will benefit us? And we can.
So I think initially we started talking about studying. So I think. Yes, if you can study, do as much as you can, but what we need to focus on is things that we can practically implement. So don't learn things just for the sake of learning things, but you want to really learn things which you can change you as a person, to make you a better person, a better Muslim, a better member of your community, a better member of society. Because otherwise it will just it's easier for it to become knowledge without action, and that's one of the things we need to be aware of. So practical things that you can learn, for example, specific adhkar, learning, you know, sunnah prayers, whatever it may be, practical things that you can take. Learning, for example, a really important one, learning the names of Allah. So when we're making dua, you know, Allah says in Surah Al-Araf at the end, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا, that Allah has the most beautiful of names, call upon Him by these names. Now if you don't know Allah's names, then how can you call upon Him by them? And so one of the ways that we can increase the likelihood of our dua being accepted is by using Allah's names in our dua. So for example, you want barakah in your children, in your wealth, in your family, whatever it is, in your job, then you use the name Al-Quddus. You want forgiveness, use the name Al-Ghafoor, Al-Ghaffar, Al-Tawwab, Al-Afu, so on and so forth. So these are the practical elements that I'm trying to really mention as much as possible, because these are things I really think can impact on our lives, and we really see a benefit, inshallah.
Yeah, mashallah, jazakallah khair. I think it's really important with the names of Allah, because when you know Allah, then you know who you're worshipping, and it builds that connection as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, definitely. I remember actually I did a talk in university last year. It was about 250 students were there, and I said to them, tell me 10 things about Allah. And, no one could tell me anything.
Subhanallah.
No one come up with 10 things about Allah. The person who we worship, we pray to 5 times a day. You sit, you wear your hijab for, in this heat, for example. You're fasting long days of Ramadan. If we don't know Allah, then what does it say about our salah? What does it say about our fasting? So really knowing who Allah is will really have a profound impact on your ibadah and your relationship with others as well.
Were these brothers and sisters people who had just come into the deen, or like?
No, they were university students.
Oh, mashallah.
University students, so you'll be surprised.
It's true. Jazakallah khairan for coming.
Pleasure.
We're going to have you again very soon, inshallah.
Honored to be here.
Jazakallah khairan. Barakallahu feekum for listening, and we'll be back with more episodes soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allah Akbar.